So most electrolyte supplements do not have enough salt in them. The reason being is because the average person loses 1,200 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat loss. This will range anywhere from 500 milligrams of sodium all the way up to 1,600 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat loss. Now, someone who has a lower salt status will lose less sodium in their sweat than someone who has a more adequate salt status. So someone who is low on salt may only lose 500 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. And you might think, oh, wow, that person hasn't lost a lot of salt. They don't need it. When in fact, actually, that person may be someone who needs more salt the most, because the primary determinant of sodium concentration in your sweat is the salt status of your body. It's aldosterone that actually determines that. So if you have a low salt status, you will have a higher aldosterone to conserve sodium, and thus you will not push out as much sodium in your sweat. But regardless, we are losing somewhere between 500 milligrams of sodium per liter and 1,600 milligrams of sodium per liter. But on average, we are losing a half a teaspoon of salt per liter of sweat, which is 1,200 milligrams of sodium. Now, we also lose a lot of salt when we consume caffeine or coffee. So 4 cups of coffee will cause a 1,200 milligram loss of sodium, which is another half a teaspoon of salt. So that is another reason why most people need a higher salt electrolyte supplement, is because they consume caffeine or coffee, which causes us to lose about 1,200 milligrams of sodium per 4 cups of coffee, which is that's about 360 milligrams of caffeine. Now, we do lose some potassium as well, around 500 milligrams of potassium, which is also why electrolyte supplements should have some potassium in it. As well as we do lose a little bit of potassium in sweat. It's not a lot. It's only about 150 milligrams of potassium per liter. But when you add up potassium losses from caffeine coffee, you add it up from losing potassium in sweat, and you add up the fact that most people aren't getting an optimal intake of potassium, having some potassium in an electrolyte supplement is also beneficial, because if you aren't getting at least about 3,000 milligrams of potassium, if you start going below 3,000, you can start retaining sodium. So you want to hit about 3,000 milligrams of potassium. Most people who are consuming a diet that is high in fruits, potatoes, and meat will go above that. But if you are not getting a lot of potassium in the diet, then having some potassium from an electrolyte supplement is definitely going to be beneficial. There are other people who need a higher salt electrolyte as well. If you are someone who gets dizzy going from a seated to a standing position, that typically indicates low blood volume, and hence that person typically will benefit more from a higher salt electrolyte supplement. So we have caffeine coffee, we have sweat loss. If you exercise hard, you're going to want a higher salt electrolyte. And if you're someone who goes from a seated to a standing position and is dizzy a lot because of that, that indicates typically a low amount of blood volume, which is almost entirely due to a low amount of salt in the body.